Out of Houston, Texas, police have discovered the badly burned remains of a young child. Reportedly naked, the body partially concealed in a drainage ditch. Police are saying the small child's body was burned beyond recognition at another location and then just dumped to the side of the road in a ditch. Is this gruesome discovery the body of missing 12-year-old Jonathan, last seen on Christmas Eve? As the investigation into the disappearance of a 12-year-old boy intensifies, both of his parents just taken in for questioning and their car towed by law enforcement. Police believe somebody abducted the fifth grader from the neighborhood. Where is 12-year-old Jonathan Foster? Live to Houston, Texas. A 12-year-old little boy just vanishes. Children don't vanish.
And the body of a small child, the body is completely burned right now. There's no indication whether this is going to be related.
He was supposed to run home
We still don't have a timeline.
and go back to the babysitters.
We've lost an incredible amount of time.
And apparently he never made it.
They're going to look at the person that last saw him.
We've heard so many conflicting stories.
The boy's stepdad reportedly saw Foster at his home.
There's a lot of confusion here.
We have reports that perhaps he was with his babysitter last.
Where is 12-year-old Jonathan Foster? Good evening. I'm Jean Casares of In Session on the True TV network, in for Nancy Grace. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are live with breaking news this evening. Out of sight for less than a half an hour, 12-year-old little boy vanishes on Christmas Eve. Police have just found a small little child's body burned beyond recognition in a ditch. Let us go straight out to Joe Gomez, reporter, KTRH News Radio in Houston. Joe, we understand the FBI has now joined the case. What's the latest tonight?
Gene, nobody expected the discovery that was made today. Only a few miles away from where little Jonathan Foster was reported missing on Christmas Eve, investigators have found the badly burned and naked body of a child in a drainage ditch. Right now, this body is so burned that police don't know. They cannot identify who it belongs to, but right now many are expecting the worst. Little Jonathan was reported missing on Christmas Eve. It's been 4 days. They found no traces of evidence. They've scoured the area nearby where he was reported missing. This is the first piece of evidence in this desperate search for little Jonathan, Gene.
And the remains of this little body burned beyond recognition are at the Harris County Forensic Science Center tonight for autopsy. But to Joe Gomez, we understand that this little person burned was found actually 3.5 miles from where Jonathan Foster went missing. What more can you tell us about this little body? I mean, was it wrapped in a bag, in a blanket? What was it like in the ditch?
Investigators found no clothing whatsoever. Maybe the clothing was burnt off when whomever decided to burn this poor child took action. Right now, police could find no traces of any sort of burn marks near the crime scene. So they suspect that whoever did this must have these dreadful actions beforehand, i.e. burn the body and then dumped it somewhere just carelessly to the side of the road. As I mentioned, they can't identify it because it's been so badly burned, but searchers continuing to search for Jonathan Foster cannot help but think, is this it? Has the poor little Jonathan Foster who vanished on Christmas Eve, has he met this dreadful end?
So to Michael Board, reporter at WOAI Radio out of San Antonio, Texas tonight, what we're understanding is that this little burned body in a ditch literally was without clothing, without a blanket, just thrown into a ditch.
And while many people want this to be Jonathan, or maybe hopefully an end to this case to figure out what happened here, there are some signs that this may not be Jonathan. Now, what we know about the body that was found in the ditch is that it was 3 feet tall. We know Jonathan is closer to 5 feet tall. So unless, you know, when you burn a body, it takes about 2 feet off of you, signs are showing that this may not be Jonathan, that, you know, it might be a miracle. Jonathan might still be alive.
And that would be a Christmas miracle. To Howard Oliver, former deputy medical examiner, forensic pathologist, joining us from Los Angeles. Police are saying at this point that it appears as though that the burned remains were 3 feet long. And we know Jonathan Foster, 4 feet 7 to 5 feet. When a body is burned, does it lose height like that?
The body will lose a slight bit of height from contraction of the tissues, but not that much loss of height. From the sounds of things, they said approximately 3 feet tall. They could have simply measured the body to find out exactly how tall it is.
And doctor, I want to ask
lose
you.
a few inches.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I want to ask you, the body is now at the Forensic Science Center in Harris County, Houston, Texas. What does it take to perform an autopsy on a little body just burned beyond recognition?
It's fairly simple. Usually the organs retain their consistency. You can tell pretty much what the cause of death is at that point. The skin and the subcutaneous tissue will burn to being in a state of being charred, but the organs of the body usually are maintained, and you can tell if they've sustained any injuries. The bones, of course, will still be intact. You can tell if he's sustained any bony injury or any blunt force trauma. But everything should be relatively intact. It should be a fairly simple autopsy.
What about determining gender? Because they can't even say if it's a little boy or a little girl.
Well, in a little girl, when the ovaries will still be intact inside. And a little boy, the testicles would have been burned away, and the genitals would have been burned away, and that's the reason you can't tell the gender. But the ovaries will still be intact. If there's still a discrepancy, you still have DNA testing to determine sex.
All right. We are taking your calls live tonight to Diane in Virginia. Good evening, Diane.
Hi, Jean. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, I had a question. I watched yesterday, and I know the first thing they always say is they like to question the people that were closest. Why didn't the police ask for someone to, and I know they can't make them do this, a lie detector from the stepfather, the mother, the babysitter? You know, why couldn't they submit to a lie detector test?
You're talking about a polygraph, and that was one of the first things we asked today of police. Nancy Grace producers spoke with them, and guess what? They will not confirm or deny that a polygraph was given to the mother or to the stepfather. But let's talk about the babysitter. To Joe Gomez from Houston, Texas, KTRH News Radio. Last night, we had heard, because the mother told local affiliates that little Jonathan was at a babysitter's. What do we hear today?
Conflicting reports are surfacing right now. The mother says that little Jonathan was left alone, apparently, with his stepfather. His stepfather stepped out while little Jonathan was playing video games at their apartment. For 25 minutes in return, Jonathan was missing. The mother, subsequently, she comes home later on. They then report that little Jonathan's missing at around 9:30 at night. So he apparently vanished somewhere in the afternoon. Then she reports that he was missing in the evening. In this little time gap here, she says that she received a phone call from a mysterious person, a woman with a raspy voice. And she says that she could hear little Jonathan's voice in the background. She got this call while she was at work. A lot of gaps here, Gene, and investigators are trying to plug holes in those gaps.
Michael Board, WOA News Talk Radio in San Antonio. Wait a minute. This child went missing 1:45 to 2 p.m. Christmas Eve. Police have confirmed with us today that 911 call was not made until 9:30 at night.
An amazing amount of time there. Anything could happen. And then what's even more amazing is that they waited from Monday at 9 o'clock, that time on New Year's Eve till Monday night to issue the Amber Alert. There's a whole lot of time in there. We don't know what was going on. If that Amber Alert had been issued right away in this case, that would have been a lot easier for the police to get a jump on whoever took this small child.
Well, Michael,
if that's
what
what
police
happened.
are saying is that there were so many inconsistencies that they didn't know what was right and what was wrong.
A kid is missing. You've got it, and there's signs that something might have happened. You've got to jump on this. Police will tell you time and time again, time is of the essence. The sooner they get that out there, heck, in 5 days that person could have gone to Oklahoma. They could have gone to Mexico. They could have gone anywhere. They should have jumped on this fast.
You're right, Michael Board from WOAI News Talk Radio in San Antonio. You're exactly right. I want to go to the lawyers. Ray Giudice, defense attorney out of Atlanta, Georgia. Doug Burns, defense attorney out of New York. Ray Giudice, last night we kept talking about the babysitter because the mother had said the little boy was at the babysitter's, left the babysitters to go get some video games, never came back. Please confirm today he was alone when he went missing. Ray Giudice, who's the babysitter? Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez?
Yeah, I'm not so worried about finding a babysitter. It's why is there such a, not only one, a huge inconsistency on where he was from the mom, and then as the reporter just pointed out, an 8 or 9 hour gap between this mysterious phone call and dialing 911. I'll tell you, if my 12-year-old is out of sight for 8 hours, I want to know where he or she is.
Doug Burns, it doesn't look good, and even if it's inadvertent that she says that the child is the babysitter, maybe he was supposed to be at the babysitter, what you say early on, and those inconsistencies can hurt your client when you're trying to defend them later on for criminal charges.
Well, of course, inconsistencies are the key that sort of unlocks a window of prosecutorial arguments about state of mind, mental intent, consciousness of guilt, and those type of concepts. So the rhetorical argument is somebody with nothing to hide is simply going to come across with a credible version as opposed to inconsistencies.
But Doug Burns,
so you're
how
right.
do you wait 8 hours, 8 hours, to call in on Christmas Eve that your little boy is gone?
Well, there's a distinction between sort of factually and what you might argue in a courtroom. Factually, it's almost impossible to explain. In a courtroom, you're going to argue, look, ladies and gentlemen, she might have panicked and been so distraught, etc., etc.
It's a child's body that was discovered after being dumped in a nearby ditch.
Roughly maybe 3 feet tall.
HPD tells us they got a call about a burned body in the 8900 block of East Hardy Road. They're looking into whether or not it may be the body of Jonathan Foster, a 12-year-old boy who disappeared on Christmas Eve.
There is a little boy, Jaden Marion, age 4, that has been missing since December 21st. And this child seems to fit the description of the charred body that was found based on height for a 4-year-old. I find no mention that it is the child, but that child is still missing. And there is, according to a mainstream media article, the babysitter, name not disclosed in the article, was brought in for questioning this evening, Tuesday evening, along with the mother and stepfather. And it just boggles my mind that it took nearly 8 hours for the mother to call 911. So clearly something is very, very wrong here.
Fifth, you might also